Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
Welcome back, y'all. We're back with the true story behind Poltergeist and some unfortunate events that happened to the people involved in the film. So, let's get into it.
The whole story of Poltergeist is loosely based on Popper, the poltergeist, who inhabited a house in the 1950s belonging to the Herman family. So, as we mentioned last episode, in the movie, Dr. Lesh touches on what a poltergeist is. According to the good old Google, a poltergeist is a ghost or other supernatural being supposedly responsible for physical disturbances such as loud noises and objects thrown around. The word poltergeist translates from German as knocking spirit. The German verb poltern means to knock, and Geist is the German word for spirit. So let's go back to February of 1958. The James Herman family lived in Seaford, New York, which is a suburb on Long Island. They lived in a cute little green and white ranch-style home that had been built in 1953. On the afternoon of February 3rd, 1958, James's wife, Lucille, was home to welcome her kids from school. Lucille, age 13, and James, age 12.
Very original.
They really went all out with the names, didn't they?
They really thought about that hard.
When the kids entered the kitchen that afternoon, chaos erupted, and not like the chaos we described in the movie. Various bottles containing liquids in various parts of the house suddenly popped their caps and danced around. They didn't actually see the bottles pop or move, but they heard the caps explode off and the liquids from inside the bottles spewed about. Mrs. Herman called her husband, puzzled about the whole situation, who was just as puzzled as she was. No one was hurt, thankfully, so there wasn't a pressing need to get to the bottom of what happened.
When Mr. Herman arrived home that night, he drew the conclusion that possibly some sort of chemical reaction had taken place, causing the lids to explode off. Plot twist, they were screw-top lids, making them popping off as they had a little more baffling. A couple of days passed without incident, but then around the same time when the children got home from school, the same thing happened. One bottle being a bottle of holy water on Mrs. Herman's dresser. It happened again the following night, too. At this point, Mr. Herman had started to suspect his son, Jimmy, was the culprit, so he spent the weekend watching him to see if he could catch him in the act. But when Sunday morning rolled around and the bottle caps popped again, he knew Jimmy wasn't to blame because he had kept such a close eye on him. He still searched the bathroom where the bottle of medicine had slid across the sink and fell to the floor looking for strings or wires. And when he found nothing, finally came to the conclusion that there were things going on in the house that he just couldn't explain. So he contacted the authorities. I just want to say, I think it's so weird that he's sitting there blaming their son Jimmy when the wife is like, there are multiple bottles popping off in the house in different spots, and my son's standing right here. But it was definitely Jimmy.
Well, I mean, kids pulling pranks, like he's looking for strings to see if he's like, manipulating stuff. Like
I also feel like it's such a typical male thing to do to try to explain away the situation by, the kids are just up to some pranks.
I think it's more of a human thing to want to give a logical explanation to something that seems out of the norm.
That makes sense. I just think it's funny. Oh, man. So, like I said, he contacted the authorities because who else are you going to call back in the 50s when something like that is going on? You don't really have a lot of options. Officer James Hughes went to the house, skeptical as well, but changed his mind within a few minutes when multiple bottles in the bathroom popped their lids and fired them in his direction. Detective Tozzi was brought in to help, suspecting some natural phenomenon, and upon his arrival was met with a perfume atomizer overturning and spilling in the daughter's empty bedroom.
Over the following days, a lot of the incidents revolved around the bottle of holy water in the Herman's bedroom. It wasn't until the disturbances took a different turn they tried a new approach for help. On February 15th, the children were watching TV in the living room with their cousin when all of a sudden a porcelain figurine on an end table next to the couch began to wiggle and then shot up 2 feet in the air and land on the floor with a thud, unbroken. The Hermans decided to enlist the help of Father William McLeod of the Church of St. William the Abbot. That's a mouthful. Father McLeod came to the house and sprinkled holy water in each of the rooms. It seemed, though, that Popper, as the poltergeist was dubbed, didn't want to leave. Of course, the media eventually caught wind of all of this, and letters and calls started arriving every day. Some offering logical solutions, some saying Martians had landed, or blaming the issues on a long-dead Indian chief, etc. You know, as they do. The Hermans remained patient and even listened to all the calls and suggestions, including one that called at midnight and shouted into the telephone, "Repent!" They handled it very well, because I would have lost it. Especially when it came to the less than pleasant letters or visitors. Some chicken scratch letters arrived condemning the Hermans for their sins and suggesting they invited these tricks of Satan upon themselves. Eventually, a physicist from Long Island's Brookhaven National Laboratory came and brought a set of dowsing rods with him. Dowsing rods. Okay, buddy. He concluded that he believed there were underground streams below the house and thought that the water might be creating a, quote, freak magnetic field, end quote. Sure.
Yeah, I guess. After some investigation, a geological survey proved this wrong, though. Detective Tozzi had even checked with the Air Force after studying their flight plans. They told him that sonic booms from passing jets couldn't have caused their issue. Also, wouldn't they have heard these sonic booms from these jets? But okay. Yeah, they're really loud. Have you ever experienced one? The whole house shakes.
I did literally just the other day. It was crazy. Natasha, so we're sitting there and you just hear the rumble start and it just builds up and builds up. And Natasha just freaking lost it. You know, she looked for the closest person she could in the living room, which was her sister, and ran and launched herself into her lap. And I thought a plane was landing in the backyard. But of course, you run outside to go look and they're long gone because it happens like that. But holy, that's the first time I had ever experienced a sonic boom in the neighborhood like that because they're not supposed to do that.
No. So you would definitely know if something like that happened. And it doesn't sound like they were experiencing anything like this. So Tozzi continued to check other possibilities, from building inspectors to the fire department, who inspected a well to see if changes in the water level could have caused anything. Nope. Nada. When a woman by the name of Helen Connolly wrote a letter saying that she experienced furniture in her living room being moved around due to a heavy downdraft through her fireplace. Okay. They thought they were onto something. That sounds real suspicious to me. She had a rotary metal turbine installed on her chimney, and the furniture rearranging stopped. Well, they tried the same thing at the Herman house, but not moments after the installation was complete, a porcelain figure launched itself from a table and smashed into a desk. Whatever is in there was like, nice try, but no.
Eventually, these disturbances became more violent, with things flying through the air and breaking. On February 24th, a large bookcase in Jimmy's room managed to fall face down on the floor. The next night, while Jimmy was not in his room, his record player lifted and moved 15 feet across the room. Around this time, Popper began knocking on walls to get attention. A group of researchers from the parapsychology laboratory at Duke University suggested that certain people, under the right circumstances, could influence the behavior of objects without touching them, i.e., psychokinesis. One of the doctors thought that someone in the house was unknowingly causing the incidents to occur, while other researchers thought that there was an actual ghost or poltergeist. However, there was strong evidence for the idea that there was a person in the house responsible for the haunting, meaning a member of the family was doing it on purpose, as Mr. Herman had originally thought. Jimmy was at or near the scene when something was happening about 75% of the time. But Detective Tazi had cleared the boy of deliberately doing anything. Things continued to happen, from a bowl of flowers sliding across the dining room table and a bookcase turning end over end in the cellar. Everything finally came to an abrupt halt on March 10th after a bleach bottle popped its lid in the cellar. It was finally over after a record of 67 disturbances between February 3rd and March 10th. To this day, there's still no logical explanation of Popper the poltergeist at the Herman house. Crazy, right?
It is crazy, but at least it's not malevolent. It's just moving stuff around and popping tops off of things.
Like a mischievous, trickster just. And then when it wasn't getting the attention that it wanted, started like, okay, well, I'm going to fucking throw this bookcase then.
Mm-hmm. Pay attention to me. Thank you.
And then it was over.
Like they said in the movie, a poltergeist can just stops at any time. Yeah. So maybe it got tired or moved on to somebody else to bother.
So I can see how, the influence from Popper was brought into Poltergeist. Yeah. It's a freaky ass twist on it, but
But the story wouldn't be the same if it was just a movie about a poltergeist popping some lids and
it'd be like a 1950s short.
With Dick Van Dyke? Family-friendly Popper the Poltergeist, like a special or something. I don't think it would hit the same. So, okay. Back to the movie. The on-set mishaps and questionable decisions of props weren't the only thing that make people think that this movie set was cursed. Because that is some of the lore about the Poltergeist, is that it was cursed. Only a few months after Poltergeist debuted, Dominic Dunn, who was 22, was killed by her ex-boyfriend on October 30th of 1982. A month earlier, after a physical fight between Dominique and then-boyfriend John Sweeney, she broke things off for good. When they first met at a party, they were thrilled at how much they had in common and actually ended up renting a house together. He was 6'1" and nearly 200 pounds, while she was small at 5'1" and only 112 pounds. Wow, she was tiny. Unfortunately, problems arose stemming from jealousy and possessiveness on John's part. That's not a good look. The idea that she might partake in a love scene with male actors made him crazy, and he even berated her for having abortions that apparently only existed in his mind. The more she pulled away and resisted his controlling nature, the more he freaked out. She wrote him a letter she never ended up sending to him that said, quote, "Don't live for me, live for yourself. You do not love me. You are obsessed with me. The person you think you love is not me at all. It is someone you have made up in your head. I think we only fight when images of me fade away and you are faced with the real me. The only man I am interested in is you, but we are not compatible. When we are good, we are great, but when we are bad, we are horrendous. The bad outweighs the good. The whole thing has made me realize how scared I am of you." End quote. That is so heartbreaking. On the night of August 27th, 1982, during a fight, he grabbed her hair and yanked so hard that handfuls came out. She then ran out of the house and drove to her mother's. Terrifyingly, John showed up at her mother's house, banging on the doors and windows, demanding to be let in. He eventually left after her mother threatened to call the police. But it wasn't long before she went back to him, and a month passed before something even worse happened. During a fight around 3 a.m., John grabbed Dominique by the neck, threw her to the floor, and began to strangle her. Thankfully, a friend sleeping in a nearby bedroom heard the sounds of her choking and gagging and ran to her room. John denied Dominique's claims that he tried to kill her and tried to get her to come back to bed. Dominique went along with it, only to slip out of the house through the bathroom window. When John heard her car start up, he ran out of the house and launched himself on the front of her car. She drove off anyway, only stopping long enough for him to hop off. She had dark bruises on the base of her throat for days. She was done at that point, and hid out at a friend's house or her mother's house and only traveled around town when she knew he was at work. John insisted that on October 26th they reconciled, but there was no evidence of this.
On October 30th, John appeared at her house after having confirmed she was home via an operator cutting in on her conversation with a friend. She had been at her house with actor David Packer to rehearse a scene. Instead of David leaving, Dominique went out onto the porch to talk to John when he showed up. Shortly, inside, David heard loud smacking sounds, angry voices, 2 screams, and a thud. When he went to investigate, John told him to call the police. He had just killed Dominique. Despite what John had claimed happened, investigators concluded that John must have choked Dominique for a full 5 minutes, while the medical examiner testified she was choked for at least 3 minutes. It just boils down to a jealous man losing control and then gaslighting and trying to blame his victim.
Yep.
He had plenty of opportunities to walk away or stop, but he didn't, and he took her life. When Dominique arrived at the hospital, her heart had come to a full stop. Machines got it started again, but she had already suffered irreversible brain damage. 5 days later, on November 4th, her family signed off on removing her from life support. John Sweeney was charged with murder, but not being presented with testimony to give a full scope of who he was in the trial, i.e., there was an ex-girlfriend that he had repeatedly abused, and they didn't allow her testimony.
Wow.
So the jury never got to hear that. John was only convicted of voluntary manslaughter, which carried a maximum of 6 years in prison.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's real creepy. Like, they said that David had said that John was real calm whenever he discovered that Dominique had been strangled. And like, John even tried to say that when he realized what he had done, he had gone into the house and took a bottle of sleeping pills to try to kill himself. And then he laid down next to Dominique's body while the cops were on their way. There was no evidence that he took the sleeping pills or tried to kill himself or anything like that. It's just, you're a piece of poo, sir.
No, he's just a controlling, manipulative piece of shit who wants to date someone who will just do everything that he says.
Mm-hmm. Another death happened years after the first movie's release. Heather O'Rourke, who played the adorable, sweet-voiced Carol Ann, was born on December 27th, 1975. She landed the role when she was only 5 years old after Steven Spielberg spotted her having lunch with her mother in the MGM commissary. Apparently, her sister, they were on set. They were there at the studio for her sister to film a movie or something like that. And Steven happened to stroll in and saw her sitting there eating with her mom.
Oh, and it's just like, you're adorable. You would be the perfect person for this role. I love stories like that.
Yep.
So cute.
After he ate his lunch, he approached them and offered her the role, who was signed the next day, over another blonde, cherub-faced girl. Drew Barrymore.
Ooh.
Which I was okay, because she landed the role in E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Okay, so she was good.
She was good. It's fine. Craig T. Nelson said, quote, Heather was just a sweetheart and shy and beautiful. She was just this wonderful little girl, and she was perfect for the role, perfect for just who she was in her innocence, end quote. Jo Beth Williams said, quote, she was so sweet and easy to work with, and she just took my hand the first day and held on to me for the rest of the time. And if I would cry, she would cry. If I would scream, she would scream. Here's this little 5-year-old girl who has this innate empathy. She was truly a gifted little actress, end quote. The first signs of illness in Heather started around January of 1987. She was at home with her mother, stepdad, and sister in California. She started feeling nauseous, and her mother, Kathleen, took her to a Kaiser facility in San Diego. She ended up taking Heather there 3 or 4 times that month, and they just told her that she had the flu. Heather's feet began swelling, and Kathleen took her back to Kaiser.
They ended up hospitalizing her for a few days to run some tests. They discovered she had a parasite called Giardia, which is a microscopic parasite that causes an intestinal illness that can cause diarrhea, gas, and stomach pain. Giardia is spread through contaminated water, food, surfaces, or objects, or by direct contact with an infected person or animal. After the hospital gave her some medicine to kill the parasite, it seemed to work and Heather appeared fine. Kathleen decided to take her back to Kaiser for a follow-up visit before the filming of Poltergeist 3 was set to start. They did an X-ray and gave her the chalky white barium junk to drink. The X-ray showed that the parasite was gone, but there was still some inflammation, so they called what they saw on the X-ray Crohn's and put her on some medications. Kathleen recalls that during the time of filming in April through June, Heather didn't have any symptoms, but she took her to another doctor to try to get her off one of the medicines that was making her face puff up. She was getting embarrassed about her chipmunk cheeks. Those medications are so hard on little bodies. She was gradually taken off of the medicine, and by September, her face was back to normal. After Poltergeist 3 filming was completed, they went on a family vacation driving from Chicago to Disney World in Florida and back to LA in July and August of 1987.
Things remained fine up until January 1988, when Heather woke up on the 31st throwing up. The following morning, Heather attempted to go to school, but Kathleen wouldn't let her. She tried feeding Heather some toast. I mean, toast has always been my go-to snack after throwing up. I don't, it's easy. But Heather said she couldn't even swallow it. To her horror, Kathleen noticed Heather's fingers and toes were blue, and she started to breathe really heavy and fast. She also noticed that Heather's stomach was distended. Kathleen called their local doctor, and his office said, bring her right in. Not 20 seconds later, Heather collapsed to the floor, and she called an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, she was still conscious, and one of them asked Heather if she was feeling bad. Heather just said, a little. The last words Heather and Kathleen exchanged were on the way to the ambulance, both saying, I love you. In the short, less than 10-minute ride in the ambulance to the hospital, Heather suffered cardiac arrest and lost consciousness. Paramedics tried to revive her. She arrived at the hospital at 8:25 a.m., where the doctors were able to revive her, and she was immediately sent to Children's Hospital and Health Center in San Diego via helicopter. She arrived at 10:45 a.m. in critical condition.
The doctors suspected an obstructed bowel and asked for permission to perform an exploratory surgery, to which the family agreed. They found an obstruction and corrected it, but tragically, it was too late. Heather was pronounced dead at 2:43 p.m. It was an intestinal blockage that had probably been present from birth, and it was missed and misdiagnosed. Kathleen said if the hospital had properly read the X-ray, her condition would have been discovered and could have been corrected in time. She filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Heather's doctors. The case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. That's
so sad. Dominique and her, it's so sad. Now, like as I said before, we are only covering the first movie and the related deaths, but there were more throughout the film's trilogy. You know, hey, let us know if you want to follow up on the rest of the movies. I could convince Gina to do it.
Yeah, I'm fine with an excuse to watch more scary movies. It's research, okay?
You've got a couple more coming up this month.
Yes, I do. And I watched one of them yesterday. I'm not going to spoil anything yet.
Yeah.
But we definitely have...
No full spoilers.
No, but we definitely have some scary stuff for you. I think this was a good place to start. We're just wading in the waters of the scary movies right now. And as we go through the month, I think it's just going to get deeper and deeper.
I will say right now, my absolute favorite one is going to be at the end of the month. So be excited about that.
I would say it's my favorite as well, just because it's the one that freaks me out the most.
For reasons that we are not going to spoil yet.
No. But I am very excited to get into that one and the history behind it.
Mm-hmm. This, truth be told, Poltergeist could end up being my favorite one just because of the nostalgia behind it and just everything. It's just one of those cult classic movies by now. God, it's 40 years old.
I still cannot wrap my head around the fact that the 80s were that long ago.
Was it 1990, like 10 years ago?
No.
I know. It's like in my mind, I'm like, oh, yeah. Somebody says, like, oh, 1998. I'm like, oh, yeah. So 10 years. No, that's not right anymore.
I know. I have to do the math. I'm like, oh, that was over 20 years ago. I'm old. And then my mortality comes into mind and I get sad. So I can't think about it too hard. But this was really fun. I think this is a fun spin. Last year we did haunted places, and this year we're doing haunted movies. So, yeah, and get to have little movie nights together. So it's a great reason to hang out more, whether it's virtually or in person. So it's been a lot of fun. So stay tuned for the rest of the month of October, as, like we said, we have 3 more movies to cover with cursed sets and haunting inspirational stories. Until next time, stay safe
and make good choices.
Bye.